I'm Michaela Parker, founder and executive director for the Academic Data Science Alliance, and I'm here to welcome you to our career panel series where we demystify the data work in a number of sectors and careers. But before we get started, I just wanted to say a few words about the Academic Data Science Alliance, or ADSA, or ADSA. We're a community of data science researchers and educators who take responsibility for a just, equitable future where data science approaches are thoughtfully applied in all domains for the benefit of all. There's a QR code on this slide. If you want to snap that with your smartphone, it will take you to our website where you can learn more about our events, activities, and how to become a member. And with that, let's get to the panel. So I'm going to give brief introductions of each of the panelists, and then we'll get right into questions. So to begin, Michael Beyeler. Michael is an assistant professor in the departments of computer science and psychological and brain sciences at UC Santa Barbara, where he directs the Bionic Vision Lab, an interdisciplinary research group interested in the computational modeling of human, animal, computer, and prosthetic vision to elucidate the science behind bionic technologies that may one day restore useful vision to people living with incurable blindness. He is Associate Director of the UCSB Center for Virtual Environments and Behavior and recipient of the National Institutes of Health, NIH, K99R00 Pathway to Independence Award, as well as the prestigious BP2 New Innovator Award. So welcome, Michael. We also have joining us today, Ariel Rokem. Ariel received a bachelor's and master's degree in biology and cognitive psychology at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He then received a PhD in neuroscience from UC Berkeley and additional postdoctoral training in computational neuroimaging at Stanford. He was a senior data scientist at the University of Washington eScience Institute, where I knew him, before joining the faculty of the Department of Psychology in 2020. His lab develops computational tools to study the biological basis of brain function and applies them to a variety of research questions. He is a contributor to Python open source tools for scientific computing and a member of the software and data carpentry communities, where he has been an instructor since 2013 and an instructor trainer since 2015. Hooray! He directs the NIH-funded Summer Institute for Neuroimaging and Data Science. Next, we have John, or Jack, Van Horn. Jack is a professor of psychology and data science at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, Virginia. He has held prior faculty positions at Dartmouth College, the University of California, Los Angeles, and the University of Southern California. He is an accomplished author, university-level educator, journal editor for neuroinformatics, and is known internationally as an expert in neuroinformatics and data sharing. At UVA, he leads a research team focused on neuroimaging data analytics, specifically focused on autism spectrum disorder, traumatic brain injury, Parkinson's disease, and Alzheimer's disease. He also directs an R25 specifically tasked with promoting biomedical data science training resources and activities. He is deeply committed to open and fair scientific practices. And finally, Susan Wright. Dr. Susan Wright is the Associate Director for Data Science at the National Institute on Drug Abuse and leads the cross-cutting data science research portfolio with the Division of Neuroscience and Behavior. She has earned her bachelor's degree from the University of Pittsburgh with a double major in neuroscience and computer science and a minor in mathematics. She completed her PhD in molecular neuroscience with an emphasis in bioinformatics at the Krasnow Institute at George Mason University, and did a clinical postdoctoral fellowship at Maryland Psychiatric Research Center at the University of Maryland School of Medicine. Welcome, everyone. Let's start with a warm-up question. So I very quickly ran through a brief bio for each of our panelists, but I'd like to ask each of you to start telling us a little bit more about your journey to your current position and maybe just a brief overview of what you do now, kind of a day-to-day look into your current position. And let's just go ahead and get started in alphabetical order. So Michael, do you want to kick us off?
Oh boy, I'm going to have to go first for all of them?
No. I'll mix it up after this. It's my first one.
Sure. Hi and welcome everybody. Thank you very much for having me. I am originally from Switzerland. That's where I was born and raised. I went to ETH Zurich for my undergrad. And then I joined UC Irvine for a master's project that I liked so much that I stayed for a PhD. And after that, some of you know I went to UW where I worked with Ariel. as well as with Ione Fine as a postdoc before I joined UCSB. So through those years, I've made quite a bit of changes in research directions, mostly because at first I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I'm very happy that I ended up here at UCSB on the tenure track. And so what my typical day looks like, it's very much split amongst the many responsibilities that you have on the tenure track. So it's research, meetings with my students, it's teaching, it's serving on committees or panels every once in a while. And so every day looks different, but it is filled with a variety of activities.
Great, thank you. I believe Ariel is next, or Jack? I can't remember. I can't do alphabetical.
Go ahead, Ariel.
I'll go ahead then. Yeah, so I am, as my bio indicated, originally from Israel, and my education was originally in biology and psychology. And then I came to the US in 2005 to do a PhD at Berkeley. And during the time that I spent in my PhD, I worked on questions in cognitive neuroscience of the human visual system. And but also at the same time, there were a lot of things changing about the way that we do science. And in particular, I spent a lot of time in the brain imaging center at Berkeley, collecting my brain imaging data, but also hanging out with Fernando Perez, who arrived at UC Berkeley around 2008 or so, as a research scientist in neuroimaging. So some of you might know the Jupiter project and IPython that Fernando originally wrote and still leads. But many of you may not know the fact that he was a neuroscientist for a brief period, sort of between 2008 and 2010. And originally Jupiter was developed while Fernando was working under a grant to develop tools for neuroimaging in Python. And I spent time in Fernando's office learning about open source software development and Python. And by the time I started my postdoc, I was really interested in open source software development. I spent a lot of time in my postdoc in that. And so by the time I then was planning what I would do next, I was considering going to industry and working in data science. Data science had already been a word by then, around 2014-ish. But then an opportunity to come to UW and work in academic data science, develop open source software, arose at eScience here, and I joined the team at eScience in 2015. And then during the time that I was here, I had the opportunity to work with students, work with postdocs, and really enjoyed that and thought, well, how could I do more of that? And then, so at every stage in my career, that the next stage was sort of a natural transition, and it was a natural transition into a research faculty position, which I now hold, which allows me then to guide students in PhDs and work with postdocs and kind of lead my own research program.
Great, thank you. Okay, Jack, you can go now.
Okay, thank you. First, thank you for inviting me to take part in this today. So I grew up probably not far from where you are, Michaela. I grew up on Vashon Island, which is just a very small ferry boat ride away from the folks of you who are in Seattle. Maybe you're familiar with it. I did my graduate work at the University of London in England, and then I did a postdoctoral fellowship at the National Institutes of Health, probably not too far from where Susan is now. And I worked there learning about neuroimaging, and in the days when positron emission tomography was kind of the go-to one, but at the kind of the cusp of using functional magnetic resonance imaging and other advanced imaging technologies using MRI. Because I was a glutton for punishment, not only was I doing a postdoc at the same time, I also went and did a master's degree in electrical and computing engineering at the University of Maryland. And so did those so basically my day job was my postdoc, and then I would go in the evenings to go do my coursework at Maryland. And then shortly after I completed that, I had an opportunity to go to Dartmouth College. And while I was there, I was part of a group who had founded something called the fMRI Data Center. And the idea was to gather the fMRI data sets that went into the peer-reviewed literature of typical cognitive function. So all those pretty pictures of the brain lit up in action that you're familiar with, the underlying data, people were very reticent to share it. And so we thought, well, wouldn't it be a great idea to get people to share that data? And so we put in a whole infrastructure and got some money, and we had good intentions. And people at that time lost their minds. They really weren't sure what to make of this group up in the woods in Dartmouth who wanted them to share their data. And it's kind of interesting to have been at the tip of that spear as kind of data sharing became a thing for neuroimaging. And over the years, I've gotten to know people like Ariel and various others who have, helped to kind of move that forward. I've also moved to UCLA and been involved in kind of the development of infrastructure to help promote sharing and to help promote high performance computing solutions, and USC following that. And then I had an opportunity to come here to the University of Virginia a few years ago and had a chance to come over here to help their efforts in this regard. So it's been great. And Michael, I also have many friends in UC Santa Barbara who we probably share commonalities with. So everybody's friends here.
What I love about these panels, the panelists themselves get to make connections.
Yeah.
That's great. Thanks, Jack. Susan.
Hi, thank you for the invitation to be a part of this panel today. Increasing the data science workforce is actually a big part of what I do at NIDA, so I'm always excited to talk about data science careers and just careers in general. So I guess to explain my career, this is going to be a very condensed version of that. Many people and events have played a role in influencing my career path. So I earned my bachelor's degree from the University of Pittsburgh, where I double majored in neuroscience and computer science and minored in math. And while I was at Pitt, I had the opportunity to work in several labs and conduct different types of research, including neuroanatomy, electrophysiology, and even some artificial intelligence. That definitely shaped my career. And although I was interested in both neuroscience and computer science, it wasn't really until my senior year that I really thought much about combining them or had the opportunity to. And I was also becoming increasingly interested in clinical research. So my senior thesis at Pitt focused on neural networks, and I used data collected from patients at UPMC's Children's Hospital. So I knew that I wanted to go to grad school, and I was luckily able to combine my interests as part of the computational neuroscience program at George Mason University, where I completed my PhD. And my thesis project there focused on digital reconstructions, morphometry, and computational models to generate novel maps of human brain vasculature, as well as implementing complex fluid dynamics models. And as part of my project, I archived the digital reconstructions that I had created in a public database. And I had many, many conversations with my mentors and my entire thesis committee about the importance of data sharing, which is a large part of my job today. I then completed a clinical postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Maryland School of Medicine within the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center. And here I studied white matter, integrity, cognition, and aging in schizophrenic patients. And I used various neuroimaging techniques as well as imaging genetics. And I was able to really continue taking a multidisciplinary approach to my research at MPRC. And it was there when I first started my postdoc that I realized that MPRC had large volumes of data from the scanner that had been collected but never analyzed. So this was many, many years worth of data. And I developed a data analysis pipeline that I believe is still being used today to help solve this problem. So I guess overall, now I'm at the NIH, but throughout my various stages of training, I gained experience with experimental, theoretical, computational, and clinical research. And I was very much encouraged to take a multidisciplinary approach to research. And at the NIH or NIDA, I am developing and leading a data science program here. So when I graduated, I will say I didn't realize the job I have even existed. And it literally wasn't because the job actually only came about fairly recently. But just as background information, the NIH is made up of 27 institutes and centers. Each of them have their own mission and budget. I'm specifically at the National Institute on Drug Abuse, or NIDA, and our mission is to advance science on the causes and consequences of drug use and addiction and to apply that knowledge to improve individual and public health. I will say that every day is very different and very exciting. I could go on and on about what we do, but we administer grants and we also help write funding announcements. There's a variety of different things. I get to serve on a number of committees, both within the agency and with other agencies. Some of the NIH-wide committees are the BRAIN Initiative, the HEAL Initiative. I'm also involved with the Interagency Modeling and Analysis Group and the Collaborative Research and Computational Neuroscience Program. And I also am lucky to be able to work with the NIH Office of Data Science Strategy on implementing the NIH-wide strategic plan for data science. And I'll stop there. Hopefully I didn't ramble too much.
No, that was great. Thank you so much, Susan. And we love having you here. of course, anyway, but also as a representative of someone who's not in a faculty position, right? So you're in a position to be able to fund others' research. And so I wonder, actually, there were a few acronyms that you dropped. If you don't mind putting some of those in the chat. I think I heard NPRC, but I'm not entirely sure what some of those are. So maybe for not just my benefit, but some of the audience, that would be really helpful too. Oh, go ahead. Did you want to say something about that? Or
I was going to say that just with government, we use so many acronyms. So I'm glad you pointed that out. I'll definitely put them in the chat.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I immediately keyed in that all of you mentioned data sharing. And I want to loop back to that at some point, but this is a career panel. So we're gonna pause on that one just for a moment and just at first start with some career advice. It sounds like Susan might be the only one in kind of a non-traditional academic position at this time, but given the roles that you've been in the past and also your current position, what advice might you have for our audience members who are thinking of finding a job similar to what you're in? And I guess most specifically, was there an experience that you were able to put on your CV or resume that helped you stand out? I heard a lot of like, Susan double majored in computer science and neuroscience. It sounded like there was a lot of that kind of background, having experience or training in data and computing type of workflows, but also having to do the neuroscience, the domain science. How much did each of those play into your career and getting jobs, if that helps? Who would like to go first, or I will call on someone? I see Jack nodding.
I can try. So one of the things which I kind of realized in doing a psychology PhD is that a lot of the statistical and mathematical techniques that we use like every day, like correlation and regression and analysis of variance, really got kind of perfected and hardened in the psychology space. And in like biology as well. And so psychology has a long history of being able to do this stuff. But that a lot of that in like neuroimaging, we just didn't have what it took to kind of apply these things at the time. I felt that we didn't have the chops to do things with a lot of the data sets that we were collecting. And one of the stories I like to tell students is when I got started, some of the data sets that we were asked to archive for our laboratory needed to go on some hard disk. So I went out and bought the biggest hard disk I could find at that time. And it was like 4 gigabytes. And that was like infinity. And that, well, I'll never fill that up. And, you know, if anybody's doing, neuroimaging today, 4 gigabytes is nothing, right? You could eat that for breakfast. And so really it was a realization that we were going to collect more data than we could possibly analyze. And that I better personally tool myself up in order to be able to kind of deal with the onslaught of data that I knew was coming. And in neurosciences, generally, we don't collect less data. We keep finding ways to collect more of it, either more per unit of space or unit of time, more modalities. We're now trying to combine them by taking large neuroimaging data sets and combining them with large genetics data sets. And so really dealing with the computational stuff was something I just had to do out of necessity. And this was even before data science became a term, but was very prescient. So good for me to kind of like see that one coming and try to take steps on it. It's been very, very helpful to be able to be conversant in multiple different areas to help me in my career as I've moved through.
And would you say that having more formal training or self-taught training or both was the key there? Or
no, it was vital. There were things I had to teach myself, various programming languages in order to be able to read in the neuroimaging data. I had to learn enough about Linux system administration to be able to, kind of keep track of data and make sure that I could move it around successfully. And so I had to do a lot of stuff on my own, but there was also the formal training in, electrical engineering and computing engineering that was really helpful too.
Great, thank you. Does anybody else want to chime in?
Yeah, I can chime in about something that I think was really important in my career development, which complements things that Jack mentioned, which is community, which is finding communities of practice that complement the academic community in which I work, which tends to be insular. You go into the lab and you do the work and so on. And I, at various stages in my career, I found communities of practice that were a little bit more open, more global. You mentioned in my introduction the software carpentry community. Finding that community was really important. Finding open source software communities to contribute to and belong to was really important. I think one nice thing about these kinds of communities are also that they tend to be distributed. You don't have to be at a particular center of that activity in order to contribute to those. And that can really be important in terms of career. I think it was really important to me in the transition from postdoc to data scientist here at eScience. I brought with me sort of this experience of belonging to these communities and working within these communities.
Can you say a little bit about how you found those communities? And if you have suggestions or URLs for neuroscience/data science communities, if you don't mind dropping those in the chat too.
Yeah, I can do that.
Resources.
Yeah. So software carpentry, if I remember correctly, my history started around 2008 when I was in graduate school. And I found that originally trying to learn things just on Google, finding Greg Wilson, who started software carpentry, had put up a lot of curriculum online. And I found that while I was trying to learn things. And then sort of got pulled in to teach at some point. I think Katie Huff pulled me in to teach at some workshop that she was teaching, and sort of just kind of from knowing people who knew other people, sort of the network effect. And there were a lot of mailing lists for open source software projects that I was subscribed to. I was using Python tools that had mailing lists, and those mailing lists had a lot more activity than they now have. Mailing lists for developers, mailing lists for users. We could go and ask questions, and I would just eavesdrop and lurk on those mailing lists and see the activity that was going on, who was doing what, where, who could I get to know. And oh, hey, yeah, I remember that. So it was really a great place to be in order to connect with other people and just learn what was going on. I got connected into, in fact, the way that I got the job that I came for UW, the job that brought me to UW first was this data scientist position at the eScience Institute. I found that job ad on the website of the Scientific Computing in Python conference, SciPy. I was in the lab at Stanford in the postdoc, and I was just kind of looking around thinking what I should do next, and having a little bit of FOMO because I didn't go to the conference. So I was looking at the website, and that's where I found the job ad. So I can do that.
That's great. And thank you for also mentioning how you found job ads, because that's not always clear either, right? I mean, if you know you want to be faculty, it's maybe a little bit more straightforward to find open tenure track positions, but maybe you don't know that and you don't know where you want to go next. So having ideas of where to find these jobs is really helpful. And for the benefit of the recording, the folks who might be watching this later can't see the chat. Steve did mention that Ariel was his carpentry instructor trainer back when he was at Oregon State. Michael, I think I saw you unmute when I asked who wanted to go next.
Yeah, both comments resonate very much with me. I didn't mention that I started out as an electrical engineer, and only later learned about or got intrigued by the brain. And at that point, it really became apparent to me that all the quantitative skills I gained were so immensely useful in terms of signal processing that I could carry forward into computational neuroscience. So now I really try to tell my students that just a solid quantitative background is so important no matter where you go, especially now that all the sciences are data science, right? I found that to be really, really important early on. And then another push I wanted to make is that you also don't need to be afraid to just get a set of diverse experiences. It's great if you already know your career path or you're aware of what your strengths and weaknesses are. Then you can supplement and try to find ways to bolster those skills. But I didn't know for the longest time what I really wanted to do and where I wanted to go. So on a grander scale, it just really helped me to try everything from research projects to internships to just volunteer experiences. And through that, just, covering a lot of ground, I think helped me do my multidisciplinary research today.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you. There is a question in the chat, but before I get to it, I was going to ask Susan if you have anything you wanted to, because you also have a slightly different current job.
Sure, yeah, I agree with all of the comments already made. I think these are really great perspectives. I think with data science, it's interesting because I think the field is still rapidly evolving. And I think like I didn't even necessarily call myself a data scientist when I was setting out to do this. And I feel like it's just a lot of terms get conflated and it can be confusing navigating this career path. I do think coursework is very important. And I do want to advertise that we actually are trying to hire a data scientist at NIDA. So we are looking for somebody that would have a data science and neuroscience background for this type of position. So if you are interested, please feel free to reach out. And even if you don't see a job advertised currently, it's always good to reach out if you are interested in working at NIH, just having your CV out there. Sometimes we can see if something's coming up or let you know, or if we see a job that would be appropriate otherwise. I also agree, I think networking is incredibly important. And I think this is also good advice for those submitting applications to NIH that are very multidisciplinary. And as program staff, we're very happy to help make connections. So I also just want to make sure that everyone that's listening to that is aware of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, it's as much as we hate it to be true, it is often who you know that kind of can get you initially in the door. So I really appreciate that, Susan, and thank you for highlighting the job. Maybe if it is available, if there's a URL or a website where that job is being advertised, that might be helpful to drop in the chat as well. And a lot of the resources that we have in the chat will also post with the recording. So the question that was asked by the audience member, I totally feel for the student. This was asked by a biophysics student, and this person wants to know, how do they know if they're qualified enough to get into the field of neuroimaging? So they do say that they're a biophysics student and have studied imaging, neuroscience, and subsignal processing, but they feel they're not very good at programming or statistics and feel a little confused by this. How do they determine the point they can start from? Does anyone in any of our panelists want to try to take a first stab at that one? This can be a difficult moment when you're not sure if this is going to be a good path for you. I understand that, me not being great at statistics myself.
I think one of the things which makes neuroimaging kind of a very interesting field is it's the nexus for a number of different disciplines to come together around kind of a commonly, an area of common interest, the brain. And so one of the things which is cool about neuroimaging is you've got MRI physicists, you've got engineers, clinicians, psychologists, psychiatrists, neurologists. There's so many different fields. And really, I think maybe to Ariel's point and that Susan reiterated as well is, making contacts with people who are working in the field is just a great way to get engaged with it. There's always going to be these interesting data challenges. If you're working at the level of the images themselves or some derivative thereof, there's always going to be opportunities to apply your Python skills, or, if you're really crazy like me, dust off your C programming and try to get in there and really make a mess. So there's just a lot of opportunities. And the Organization for Human Brain Mapping annual meeting is one that I've gone to for years. And it is probably one of the premier meetings where a lot of quantitative methods work is done in the space of neuroimaging to map the human brain in health and in disease. The meeting will be in Montreal in June, and I don't believe it's too late to register and attempt to go if you wanted to learn about that space. I think I'll see Ariel there probably. So check it out.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think that's for any student who's a little unsure of where to go next. Just try to attend as many conferences as you can that are in the areas that you think you might have interest. You really get a better sense for what are the projects, what are the research challenges, what are the approaches, so you have a better sense of what you might need in order to enter the field. So very good advice. Does anyone else also want to spin off of that?
I can just follow up just to say, for me personally, rare is the project that I know everything about. So, right, neuroscience spans a really broad set of stuff, everything from the quantitative to the technical to the domain knowledge, the biology, clinical implications, and so on. And so a lot of the work that I do is collaborative with a lot of other people who know things that I don't know. And so one way to kind of progress is to find other people who complement your knowledge and work with them, find places where you can learn more and progress in your knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. So many fields are relying on such different data types these days, right? Even text analysis. Before I go, there is another question in the chat, but before I go there, Michael or Susan, did you want to say any words about the first question?
Sure, I can add, I think that the fact that somebody is asking if they're qualified enough probably means that they are. I think it's a good thing to maybe realize that maybe you don't have all the answers. And I think that's actually something that's a really good quality to have, and just to realize that you're going to be continuously learning no matter what you do.
100%. That's all of us. I think we all have a little imposter syndrome, like we don't belong here, and it's you know, you're not alone. That's all I want to say there too. Okay, so let me turn now to the next question from our audience in the chat. This person asks, how should I get more neuroscience experience generally? This person comes from economics and data science background and currently an incoming master's student in data science and engineering. So someone without a neuroscience background, but clearly some interest there. How would they first get started? And I'm assuming, again, attending a neuroscience conference might be useful, right?
Society for
Finding
Neuroscience
out more about
is a major league conference where 30,000 brain geeks all come together. It's so big, they can only hold it in places like the San Diego Convention Center or the Washington, D.C. Convention Center. I think it's going to be in Washington in November. That's an intense conference. There's just a lot of people, but it is the current thinking about everything from synapses to cells to systems to syndromes and everywhere in between. And it is a really good conference to try to attend if you can do it.
Great. I have a suggestion too, but I see Michael unmuted. You have a good one?
I was going to say, try anything and everything, really, from maybe you can audit a course to just watch YouTube videos to maybe you can join a journal club or a lab meeting of a neuroscience lab at your university. On top of that, I'll say that I have built my group in an interdisciplinary way for that very reason. So there are neuroscience students talking to computer scientists, talking to psychologists. So I think that my students really like this and realize quickly, although they know a lot, there's a lot of other stuff they don't know, and so they can learn from each other. So if you have the choice, if you have the opportunity to join such an environment, if that resonates with you, definitely look for that. It might already exist at your university. And so, yeah, long story short, try anything and everything.
Yeah, I was going to say something about joining a lab or looking for labs in neuroscience where you could talk to the professor and just about joining a lab meeting, hearing more about what they do, or offering to volunteer in a lab. Spinning again, or emphasizing, I should say, that data science in every discipline is a team sport, right? And that not everybody who's on a neuroscience team is a neuroscientist. That's also really important to remember.
And research assistantship is the one I forgot to mention.
Yeah.
That would be another opportunity to join maybe an established team already and contribute. Yeah.
And I can also just add that there's several internships available at NIH, so there may be something there too. If you're interested in that, feel free to reach out to me.
Good, great suggestion. I don't see anybody else unmuting, so we'll move on. We've talked a little bit about the team sport nature of neuroscience and the intersection with data science and how the field and data have evolved. Thinking about preparing for the careers, we did talk a little bit about the skills that might be needed. Does it feel like there's an evolution of the field where the data types are changing too? And are there approaches that now are useful in neuroscience that maybe hadn't been before? How are you seeing the field evolving and the careers that folks on the call might be looking at? What are some of the skill sets that they should kind of make sure they have when they start going down this career path? And we can talk, this doesn't need to be a question about like Python versus R. I mean, like also how important is communication How important is team collaboration, right?
I can start off. I would say that from what I'm seeing at the NIH, there is the diversity of data types and analytical approaches have expanded considerably, especially in the last few years. So we really have a need to address the growing data science needs. I'm seeing this a lot with the BRAIN initiative, but also across NIH. I think it's also really critical that we're following our overall NIH data science strategy. So that's available if anybody would like to see that on the web. And I guess I'll let others answer because they may have a different perspective being at universities.
Yeah, I think that tool set I'm seeing, given just the volumes of the data that are involved in sort of modern neuroscience, that tools related to cloud computing are becoming important. The ability to use the cloud in order to compute on very large data sets that just can't be moved around. Understanding that kind of domain is important. I think learning to program is a good thing. Programming is, to paraphrase Steve Jobs, is a bicycle for the mind. You can, if you take a train, it'll take you to certain stations, but if you take a bicycle, you can go other places that you can decide to go to. And I think programming gives you that. So I think programming is very important, regardless of the particular language that you're learning.
Yeah, good advice.
I think it's interesting that a lot of the data types that we collect in the neurosciences generally cover the broadest spectrum of spatial and temporal scales, I think, of any other organ system. We're looking at, microscopy data and doing, looking at levels of neurotransmitter receptor densities at the level at the synaptic level. You kind of move up a level and you're looking at populations of neurons. You're looking at connectivity of white matter fiber pathways. You're looking at kind of cognitive networks of that underlie cognitive patterns, and all of that on top of function and structure, and applying that in health and in disease. It's the richest form of data that I'm aware of, and it changes all the time, and it gets more and more detailed. And as if neuroimaging wasn't collecting enough data, we're involved now with projects with genetics and gene expression and epigenetic factors. And all of these things are themselves large scale data, and you need that cloud computing or high performance computing systems at your university or elsewhere to be able to wrangle data like that. And so it really does challenge you to kind of think differently about how you're going to look at that data, what you hope to get out of it. And oftentimes you find that sometimes there's a tool that you might need that doesn't really exist. So you have to go, and as Ariel says, you kind of start programming and you figure out how to create that thing that didn't exist to get you that one step further. And that's why it's just a fascinating area to be working right now.
I can add a few more things if anybody wants to know. So the NIH does have a new policy for data management and sharing that went into effect in January. So that's something that really is something you need to discuss with your program officer if you're getting funded by NIH. And it's really going to be a back and forth, making sure that you're sharing appropriately. And there's a lot of considerations that go into that. And then speaking of cloud computing, I just want to highlight that we use the STRIDES initiative at NIH, when that stands for, I hope I get this right, Science and Technology Research Infrastructure for Discovery, Experimentation, and Sustainability. And it's a very good initiative. Basically, it's addressing the recent shift to using the cloud, and there are discounts available. So if you are interested in that as well, also feel free to contact me and I can set you up with the right people.
And maybe one more thing. I think it's great that the field as a whole is moving towards standardized data types, platforms to share the data. And so I think for anyone starting out, it's important to be aware of those and be familiar with those, because when it comes to the practical limitations of the day-to-day business, if your research group doesn't know how to use the tool, it's too much time to learn it. they will fall back on the options that are most convenient to them. And I've seen this, especially when as you are in a team science setting where you have experimentalists trying to communicate with computational people, that it's really important to define that interface well. And so standards and these openly shareable platforms help you with that. But yeah, if no one knows how to use them, then they won't be used in daily life. So.
Awesome. And thank you for all of you for looping back to the data sharing conversation. I didn't even need to prompt you, and we all ended up there somehow. So that was great. I do want to ask now, it's a bit of a pivot, about kind of the process of getting a job in neuroscience and neuro data science specifically. When you think back on when you were applying for jobs, what kind of helped you stand out to make it through those different rounds? Was it important to have a website? Were there certain things that you felt preparing for the interview were essential, right? So if you think back, what were some kind of the pivotal moments or preparation or skills that you could have that you've highlighted through your career, and how did you communicate that effectively so that you got to where you were, if that makes sense? I'll give you a moment to think. And audience, please do put some more questions in the chat if you're interested in hearing more from our panelists.
You know, I think you got to have the credentials, obviously. I mean, that's sort of expected. One of the things which I think was really helpful for finding a job or getting, clued into jobs that might be available was having an advocate or a mentor who would help point these out to you. Because very often when you're nose to the grindstone and you're worried about, trying to get your latest paper out the door or whatnot, you may not be attending to all the places where these jobs may be happening. And sometimes, like Ariel mentions, you'll find them in random places. And if you have somebody who can be a mentor, who can, is an advocate for you, could make an introduction, could basically point you in the right direction, that is just so valuable. And you just need one person to kind of believe in you, to kind of like point you in the right direction. That can open so many doors and kind of get you going. And then once you're off and running, then, it's a little bit easier the next time. So I think that's a very important element.
That is great advice. So true. We need somebody looking out for us, right? And telling us where to find those jobs.
Yeah, well, because very often it's, that person knows somebody who's looking for somebody to do this. And it's not advertised yet, but it's going to be, and you're going to get the inside track. So sometimes those are really helpful.
That's how I ended up at eScience. Standing next to Bill Howe in the buffet line. Susan?
So I can add that being a NIH program staff, we do get a lot of jobs advertised through us, and we send them out through different listservs. So if you ever are curious or are looking for a job, it never hurts to email your program officer and just say what you're looking for. They may be able to make a connection that way. And then if you're interested in actually working at the NIH, USA jobs, and also just looking at different job listservs for those types of jobs are a good way to do that. But we can also look at LinkedIn and try to find candidates as well.
LinkedIn. So having a good LinkedIn profile page. Ariel or Michael, are there any keys? Bits of wisdom.
I mean, I find it really hard to answer. I don't know what got me hired. Ultimately, I believe that there's certain low-hanging fruit, like having a website, having a Google Scholar profile, are really helpful. Make it easier for the other person to find you and find the relevant information. But did that ultimately get me hired? Probably not. What I think is really important on the academic job market, which is so competitive these days, is that you set yourself apart from your previous mentors, PhD or postdoc, to really make the case that you're this independent researcher who has learned during their PhD and postdoc programs, but they're not just the next version of your PhD mentor. You're your own researcher with your own vision, and somehow that needs to show through all that you do, your recent papers, your research statement, and so on.
Yeah, great points.
Yeah, I can add to that. I think like many things in life, it's important to have empathy. It's important to try to understand what the person looking for someone needs, what they want, what they need to hear from you. And that's important regardless of what kind of career you're looking for. You want to be able to tell a coherent story about who you are and how you're the missing puzzle piece in the puzzle of that particular hire. And that's something you need to practice also, right? So if you're in a certain position, you think you'll want to be in another position a few years down the road, it's not too early to start thinking, what is the story that I tell about myself? And it's fine also, I was in this position myself as a postdoc, to have several stories in your head at the same time. One that's about, I'm going to go to industry and do data science in industry. And another is about, I'm going to go to academic research and do open source software in academic research. It's fine to hold several stories about yourself, but it's important to have a clear, coherent story that you can tell to different people.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for mentioning industry. There's also a number of nonprofit institutes. So there are other places to get into neuroscience and data science that's not necessarily in academia. And I know some of those institutes, I believe, have internships as well. So that's another place to go look for dabbling into the field. Okay, I'm going to ask a kind of terrible, horrible question. Oh, Susan, did you want to add something real quick? I saw you unmute.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to add, now that I am interviewing people, some of the things I look for in addition to having the right background would be people that are excited and passionate about what they do. That really comes across in the interviews. And also, I think it's really important to show that you can work well with others and be a part of a team.
Can I add one more
absolutely.
thing?
Yeah, no, please. This is open, freeform.
A CV is really, really important. It's the document you're going to send to people to introduce yourself. It's the thing you're going to put in with your application. Really work on your CV and get feedback from people who are hiring about your CV. Ask them to read your CV. And I read a lot of CVs for various things, and you can see who really polished their CV and who hides the important information on page 15 of a 20-page document. It's a really important document, and just really polish that.
Are there resources that any of you know of that, I mean, you said you have others review, so colleagues are a good resource. Are there other open resources for getting help on CV polishing or interview prep that you know of? And it's fine if not, but if something occurs to you, please drop it into the chat. Okay, so now I'm going to add the terrible, horrible, very no good question, which is, and I'll give you all a moment to think, is there anything you would have done differently? So thinking back on your career path, are there any maybe slightly false moves, mistakes, things that you wish you could, and it doesn't have to be something you did that you regret. It could also be you wish you had done something along the way and didn't get a chance to. And while everybody's thinking, audience note, there's a lot of good resources in the chat right now. Susan dropped a number from NIH. And you're also welcome to reach out to myself if you would like a connection to any of the panelists.
I have something to get it started.
Great.
I wish it didn't take me so long to find my passion for science. Like I'm a first generation PhD student. In undergrad, I was a terrible student. I almost dropped out. And it took me so long to really just get involved with research. I was too intimidated to talk to professors. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And so I feel like if, although I don't regret at all where I'm at today, it seems to have worked out. I feel like there were some years lost that could have, I don't know, maybe helped me build my career differently, or just helped enrich my experiences. But the flip side of that is that I feel like it's never too late, right? It takes a little bit of a flame to kindle your passion for research, and there are different ways to do that. So even if you are not the poster child, right, to follow these steps that these experts here line out, so if you follow those, you get your dream job, right? It usually doesn't work like that. even if you don't follow these steps, there's still a chance to make it.
That is great advice. And you made it. You are to where you are, right?
Yeah.
Anyone else want to chime in? Susan?
I have a few things maybe to say. So I think having confidence is something that I would wish I would have had more confidence throughout my career. And I think it's always important to remember that if you're invited to a meeting and you should be speaking up, there's a reason that you're there. And I think also maybe less about what I would have done differently, but more about what I think is the most important. And I think it's really to stay curious and be willing to learn what you don't know, because I think that's going to take you very, very far. And there's always going to be something that you don't know, and there's no shame admitting that you don't know that. And it's also really important to work with others who have the expertise you're trying to get. That would be my advice.
Great, thank you. I love that. Admitting what we don't know.
Yeah.
So important. Jack?
I was going to follow up on Susan's comment that it seems like we figured it all out, right? We followed this very linear path to kind of arrive where we are. And I'll be the first to tell you, I made it up as I went. It was just opportunities presented themselves and I jumped at them. And, who knows what the next opportunity is, when it's going to appear and what it's going to be, and, when I take it. I think one of the important elements to follow Susan's line of thinking is that we have a license to continue learning. And just because you've made it, you've got your PhD. Well, that's just, that's your learner's permit, to keep going. Then you get your postdoc under your belt. You get that first faculty job. You should just always, it's just an opportunity to continue learning. And if you ever get to a place where that kind of, you feel that that's stopping, it's time to make some change and change it up. It can be difficult because sometimes those different changes take you to different parts of the country, may take you away from like where you grew up or where your family lives. And, I've been pretty nomadic in my career. And I suppose if I had one regret, it's moving away from where I grew up and where my family still lives. And then having to fly back home every once in a while to kind of get my fix. It would have been nicer to raise my kids around their grandparents, chasing my career. But nevertheless, it's just always been this opportunity to continue to explore new things, to learn from new people. And it's one of the perks of being in what we do is going around the world and meeting and having interactions with some of the smartest people you'll ever talk to, talking about brain science, talking about data science. And it's just been so exciting to be able to do that. And it's just a continual learning process, which I just adore. I think it's fantastic. And the brain's a great place to, be exposed to that and be exposed to the data science that comes with it.
If I can jump back in real quick, that just resonated so much. When the opportunity presents itself, right? You have to be ready. I feel like maybe that's one of the defining factors of whether you'll make it or not. I remember that I didn't feel ready when the postdoc opportunity presented itself. I had still like 6 months to go in my PhD, and I found this job ad, and I was just replying to Ariel, actually, can I get a little more info? And then a day later, we already had an interview scheduled, and I was scrambling to get ready. But I'm so glad that I did it because it's all about that. It's when the opportunity presents itself. You might have a path in mind, but then your opportunities might take you somewhere else, but you have to be ready in that moment.
Yeah, great advice. Any last thoughts? All right, we are at the top of the hour. There's no need to go past that. If anyone has any last pearls of wisdom, career advice, cheerleading for neuroscience is the place to be, send us out. We have a very nice thank you in the chat to all of you.
I always tell people that brain science is a data science, and it shouldn't be too surprising. We're collecting more data than we've ever collected before. And the mathematical routines and algorithms and software that's being developed is just going crazy. It's really quite remarkable, but it shouldn't be too surprising that data science is also kind of a brain science. We talk about machine learning, artificial intelligence, basically brain-related things keep coming up in this field. So it shouldn't be too surprising. We're trying to teach computers how to be brain-like. And so it's a natural for me to see a connection between brain science and data science and vice versa. It's a great space to be in, to learn about, and you've got a lot of people who are willing to help you. So reach out to them.
That is a great place to end. Anybody else? No? All right. Thank you, panelists, so much for joining us. Thank you for those pearls of wisdom and encouragement. And thank you, audience. It looked like we had a lot of great enthusiasm for the questions, and it looked like it was helpful based on the chat. And as I said, there will be a recording if you need to refer back, and we definitely can drop the resources there too. So with that, I think I will bid you all a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you for joining us.